Good evening. For this evening, you will hear the Charter Review Committee's recommendation for the current charter school application. The presentation will include a brief review of the applicable laws and timelines in the current process. As a reminder, you will vote to approve or deny the application next Tuesday, April 25th. As previously discussed with Mr. Nolan, if you have any questions for the Charter Review Committee or the applicant, you can submit those directly to Mr. Nolan by noon on Friday via email to give both parties time to provide responses before your vote next Tuesday. Please do not copy other board members' questions. Mr. Nolan will collect and seek answers to all questions submitted. Please indicate if your question is for the applicant, the Charter Review Committee, or both. Although the representative for the Charter Review Committee may be to write down any questions you may have and send those to Mr. Nolan. This will ensure that you receive thorough responses since there were several internal and external content experts who served on the committee. Finally, I want to remind everyone that next Tuesday's formal meeting is the opportunity to comment, debate, and vote on the approval or denial of the application, not tonight's study session. At this time, I'll turn it back over to our director to start the presentation.
Thank you. I would like to introduce our Director of Continuous Improvement, Elizabeth Vincent, who prepared the presentation for this evening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Linnevetter, and thank you, board members. Good evening. Happy to be here with you all tonight to share the recommendation of the Review Committee regarding the charter application that we received this year. I want to begin the evening by spending some time looking at relevant state laws and rules and policies around the charter application review process to let you all have a sense of what really grounded the Review Committee as we engaged in the review. Tennessee state law is very specific about what should be included and how a charter review is supposed to work, and I wanted to make sure you had an understanding of what some of those different expectations are before I get into the information regarding our recommendation this evening. One of the main laws in Tennessee that discusses charter schools and their purpose and the application review process is Tennessee Code Annotated 49-13. That is our Charter School Act as a state, and it outlines the purpose for having a charter school law, why we have that in place so that districts may receive applications and review and consider those for potentially opening in a school district. And so the purpose of the law is really improving learning for all students, providing options for parents to meet educational needs of students. That's one of the key focal points of the charter school law, is ensuring that there are options available. Encouraging the use of different and innovative teaching methods and providing greater decision-making authority to schools and teachers in exchange for greater responsibility for student performance. Measuring performance of pupils and faculty and ensuring that children have the opportunity to reach proficiency on state assessments. Creating new professional opportunities for teachers, and affording parents substantial, meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their children. So when a charter school applies to open a school in the state of Tennessee, these are the key purposes that they should be expected to meet, and those are outlined very clearly in state law. receives a charter application that they review and consider is considered an authorizer in the state of Tennessee. And there are certain standards and expectations that authorizers are held to in state law to ensure that they undertake a rigorous, thorough, and objective review. And I want to share a few of those with you now. First, I want to look at some principles that authorizers are supposed to keep in mind. First and foremost is maintaining high standards. As an authorizer, we are to maintain high standards both during the review process as well as maintaining those high standards in the event that a charter were ever approved and opened in Clarksville, Montgomery County school system. The second principle is to uphold school autonomy to ensure that the school has that core autonomy that's crucial for the school's success and that they're held accountable for outcomes rather than processes. And then finally, protecting student and public interests. Ensuring that the well-being of students is kept at the center. That's certainly something that the review committee kept as a central focus throughout our work together reviewing this application is really strongly considering the needs of our students and also holding schools accountable for fulfilling their obligations to the public. As public entities, that is an important expectation that we have to hold for any charter schools that apply in the state of Tennessee, and that's why it's included in those principles. I want to spend some time now looking at the quality authorizing standards that are provided in state board rule and policy that, again, just provide you with a sense of the expectations that we are held to as a school district and the expectations that we are held to as a review committee as we engage in this process. First, a quality authorizer will consider diverse educational philosophies and approaches. They'll also require applicants to demonstrate capacity to serve students with diverse needs. And the language goes on to state that diverse needs can include students with disabilities, students from low-income backgrounds or at-risk backgrounds, students who receive services as English language learners, and other similar diverse needs. It also dictates in the standards that an authorizer will implement a charter review process that is open, well-publicized, and transparent, and is organized around clear, realistic timelines. I'll talk more about the timeline of our charter review process momentarily, but to the point about a process being clear, open, and transparent, I want to share with you some information that has been on the CMCSS website since the receipt of our application. We did this last year as well. Upon receiving a charter application, we post that information to the CMCSS website for the public to access at any point during the charter application review process, so they can review the same information that's provided to the review committee. We also have here, you can see the budget worksheet, the recording from our capacity interview with the applicant on March 15th, as well as our policy and procedure that inform the review process. So we strive to keep the process open and transparent in keeping with the standards set forth in state board policy. I also want to highlight that there is a survey that has been linked on this website that's been live since roughly around the same time as we received the application, where members of the public in the community could go on and after they review the application materials, fill out that website and share their perspective on the application. So that's another way that we've attempted to keep this process open and transparent. A quality authorizer also will require applicants to present several really important pieces in their application materials. And I want to highlight those for you because these are things that the review committee kept at top of mind as we engaged in our application review. And they're important for ensuring that an application does actually meet the standard for opening. And one is a clear and compelling mission, a quality educational program, a demonstration of community support, a solvent and sustainable budget and contingency financial plans, a clear demonstration of effectiveness of the model for the target student population, effective governance and management structures and systems, founding team members that demonstrate diverse and necessary capabilities in all phases of the school's development, and clear evidence of the applicant's capacity. So when we think about material reasons for the recommendation that you will see, these are some points that are very important to keep in mind as we think about what defines whether a charter school should be approved for opening. Just a few more of the standards I want to highlight for you as far as what is expected of a quality authorizer. A quality authorizer will only grant charters to applicants that have demonstrated competence and capacity to succeed in all aspects of their particular school model. They will rigorously evaluate each application, and the law goes on to say, or the rule goes on to say, that rigorously evaluating a charter application requires reviewing the application materials, the written materials individually. It requires conducting a capacity interview with the applicant, and it also requires conducting independent due diligence, in which if there's something in the written application materials that needs further examination with other data sources in order to fully understand or contextualize, review committee members will engage in that process of conducting independent due diligence, and we discuss those things as a review committee. Quality authorizers will also engage highly competent teams of internal and external reviewers that will include relevant educational, organizational, financial, and legal expertise, as well as thorough understandings of the essential principles of charter school autonomy and accountability. In January, Dr. Limabetter presented you all with a recommended list of charter review committee members, which you all voted on in January. And that list of individuals that participated in this process included members of the Director's Executive Cabinet, other key senior leader officials in CMCSS. There were also representatives from both city and county government, a representative from our Parent Advisory Committee who sat on that board. All of the required components that are outlined in this expectation from the state were expertise areas that were represented in that review committee. I want to share a little bit with you about the process that we have gone through as we've undertaken the review of this charter application, so you have a sense of the full 90-day timeline, which is the requirement that's outlined in state law for how long a district will spend reviewing an application, making a recommendation, and ultimately holding a vote. When we received a letter of intent from this applicant that they intended to provide us with an application, we compiled the membership of the review committee and began thinking through who would be on that committee that we would recommend to you. And then, as I indicated, in January, you all reviewed and approved that membership that is the review committee. In February, we began having meetings as a committee. We received our application on February 1st, and on February 6th, we met as a review committee to go through training. Review committee members were trained on how to use the rubric that is required by the Tennessee Department of Education for us to use to review all charter application materials. They were also trained on the timeline for the charter application review process and provided an overview with some of those required pieces and what that looks like. On February 23rd, our committee met again, and at this point, we split into groups to review key portions of the application that related to some of the expertise areas of some of those individuals that we had in the room. And we spent quite a bit of time going through a deep review of specific application materials that aligned with the expertise of individuals we had in that room. All team members completed individual reviews of the application as well, but in order to best leverage the expertise that we had from everybody in that room, we wanted individuals that had specific knowledge of something like finance to be able to spend an extra amount of time reviewing financial information and providing notes that all review committee members could benefit from as they engaged in their individual review. So February 23rd was a day for that meeting and discussion. From February 23rd to March 13th, team members engaged in individual review, where they themselves reviewed their application materials, reviewed notes that we compiled during our team meeting, and then on the 13th of March, we came together for just a quick touch point to make sure no one had any questions during the individual review process, things of that nature, and we also prepared for our capacity interview with our applicant, which occurred on March 15th. On March 15th to April 3rd, we again went through the individual review process, now with notes from each of our teams, as well as notes from the capacity interview that could inform and supplement that individual review that we all undertook. On April 3rd, our review committee met for a final time to discuss all of our findings up to that point and come to a conclusion as to what our recommendation would be. And of course, April 18th is today, and I'm here before you presenting that recommendation with bells on. And on April 25th, you will vote on this application. And I want to share a little bit about some of the potential outcomes. If you vote to approve the application, the authorization process would then begin for this charter to open in 2024-2025 school year. If your vote is to deny, the applicant then has the opportunity to submit an amended application. They have 30 days in which to turn in those amended application materials, and all of the feedback that you will hear tonight and that you may provide will be shared with the applicant that they can review and incorporate and consider as part of that amended review period. If the applicant did decide, if the decision was to deny and the applicant decided to submit an amended application, the review committee would then have 60 days to review those application materials in their amended form. The same review committee would carry over for that process that we had for this portion of the review. And if that's initiated, it would most likely take place in June and July. That's roughly the time frame we could expect if that's the way that things happen. So again, just a few final notes on the process. According to state law, districts have 90 days to review, make a recommendation, and ultimately vote on a charter application. We went through individual reviews of the application materials, but ultimately came to a group consensus as to what our recommendation would be. There is a rubric that we are required to use to review all application materials that the Tennessee Department of Education creates and distributes each year. There are 3 different summary sections of a charter application: academics, operations, and finance. And in order for a charter recommendation to be for approval, in order for us to recommend a charter application for approval, all summary ratings have to meet or exceed the standard for each of those sections. So that's just an important note to keep in mind as I go through the recommendation. With that, I will begin by talking about the academic section of the application, which is section 1. The materials included in this area as subsections are, of course, academic plans that the applicant has, but also includes information about enrollment and marketing and how they plan to recruit students, as well as things like school culture and student populations. It is the position of the review committee that based on the information we had, the applicant partially meets the standard for section 1, academics. There are some strengths that we will highlight. There is a focus in this application on a small school environment. Their mission is aligned with some of the central purposes for forming a charter school as outlined in Tennessee state law. The applicant's also very grounded in their mission and philosophy, which came through not only in their application materials, but also was evident in their capacity interview with us. And finally, the applicant included several more diverse marketing materials that they have as part of their slate for marketing campaigns this year. There were some materials that they presented that were offered in different languages, and as a diverse community, the review committee appreciated seeing that provision. However, there are some deficiencies that I want to highlight for you at this time. First and foremost, we cannot confirm clear alignment between the curricular materials that the applicant plans to use and the Tennessee academic standards. Students are held accountable to standards in Tennessee and not a curriculum, and so we want to ensure that those materials are clearly aligned. Upon asking the applicant about this in the capacity interview, the response that we received was essentially, that those were ongoing conversations. There was a clear understanding that it would be an expectation of adults in that building to be fully aware and trained on the standards so they could ensure that alignment was in place. Given our understanding that their recruitment strategy for their administrator will probably take them outside the state of Tennessee, they appear to be casting a pretty wide net in recruiting that administrator, that learning curve is pretty steep. To become intimately familiar with the Tennessee state standards and know them to a level to ensure that curricular alignment is there and that teachers can pick up the slack in areas where the curriculum may be short, is a pretty high expectation, and it's something that the review committee needs to be more concrete. We feel it needs to be more concrete. This is especially the case if we consider that curricular materials may not be explicitly designed to align with standards like the Tennessee academic standards, which appears to be the case potentially for some of their curricular materials, specifically their math curricular materials. What you see on the screen before you is a report from the organization edreports.org, and as part of independent due diligence of one of our team members, she spent some time looking at the various curricular materials highlighted by the applicants in their application and spent some time determining if those materials were aligned to college and career ready standards. EdReports is a third-party independent organization that reviews curricular materials that may be put in classrooms across the country and determines if they're aligned to college and career-ready standards, similar to what Tennessee has. Several of the materials that were created by one of the groups cited in their application, Singapore Math, were shown not to meet college and career-ready standards. And so given some of that information, we want to be sure that this applicant prioritizes aligning their curricular materials to Tennessee standards and has a concrete plan for that. As a note, this information, as I indicated, was provided through independent due diligence. It was provided to the review committee for our February 23rd meeting at which we considered this. Another deficiency that I want to be sure I highlight for you has to do with the RTI plans that are put forth by the applicant. Currently, their plans for providing response to intervention and instruction supports for students are not in alignment with Tennessee state guidelines, particularly in areas like the amount of time that they've allotted in their time blocks not aligning to what Tennessee requires. Specifically, as an example, they indicate they will require 80 minutes for their math block, and in Tennessee, at grades 3 to 5, a 90-minute requirement of uninterrupted Tier 1 time is what the department indicates. We also have several concerns with verbiage that's highlighted in the student handbook provided by the applicant, which is attachment B of their application. Specifically, that there are some areas where maybe their policies as they lay out there are not in alignment with state expectations or state law. For example, one of the things that the applicant indicates is that they plan not to allow students to obtain credit for missing homework or missing assignments that they miss during unexcused absence periods, which is not in alignment with Tennessee expectations that enforcement of absence policies will not affect a student's academic standing. Similarly, the applicant indicates that if a student cannot pay any requested fees, that they reserve the ability to prevent the student from registering for school the following year, which we do not believe to be in alignment with state law. Additionally, there were several references throughout the student dress code to expectations for student appearance that we feel are not clearly defined and could exclude students if we don't have a better understanding or a more appropriate understanding of what those terms mean. Descriptors such as clean and tasteful backpacks, hairstyle traditionally, boys' hair not being lower than the top of the shirt collar in the back, that reasonable alterations to uniform may be made for religious purposes. And so without a clear understanding of exactly what some of those terms might mean, we can't be sure that that may not create an environment that would exclude some students. We're a very diverse community with a lot of different cultural and religious norms that are practiced and accepted across the community, and want to be sure that this is an environment that, that would be inclusive for all students who may want to attend the school. Additionally, as part of some of our due diligence as a review committee, we attempted to stay in touch with the conversation on social media around the application. Of course, as I indicated to you all, we have a survey that has been out in the community since we received the application, and we also followed some of the comments that we were seeing there. And some of these language points in particular were things that we tended to see highlighted by community members as being concerns. And so that was meaningful for the review committee as well, that not only was it a concern that we had, but also that members of our community seemed to indicate they had as well. It's also unclear from the information that we have provided to us exactly what the level of community demand and parent support is for this particular model. One of the main points they provide that the review committee was able to fully consider is a survey that only got responses from what appears to be 25 to 27 families with children, which doesn't represent a figure that would get them close to their enrollment projections of 340 students in the first year. They indicated this survey was distributed to individuals in the region, that they received about 110 responses, with 25% indicating they were families with children. So with that, we felt that was not something that signified demand at the level that we expected. I also wanted to share a screenshot with you of the current status of the survey that we have that's live. Now, precursor, I took this screenshot this morning. We very likely could have had more responses come in the last few hours. We have around 100 responses to that survey right now that individuals have submitted, and right now it's split about 53% opposing and 46% in favor of the application. So a very kind of divided feel as far as the survey data that we've been able to collect. Some other deficiencies I want to highlight in this particular portion of the application have to do with the applicant's plans for working with students from special populations and students with diverse needs. Overall, when you look at the special populations section of this application and its materials, there are several references to things that we would like to see when talking about working with students with diverse needs, that we want to focus on their individual needs. We want to meet student needs at an individual level, use assessment data to ensure that we can get to the root of student needs and individual individual level. However, when you look at the training that the applicant intends to provide to teachers and staff and faculty in the school, a lot of the training seems to be focused more on meeting student needs as a whole. A lot of general kinds of things like curriculum and instructional strategies related to meeting all needs in a classroom. And it doesn't seem to the review committee that there will be enough capacity for teachers at their classroom level to engage in the kind of individual differentiation that they may need to really meet individual students' needs. So we want to ensure that the capacity is really there to support that philosophy that they highlighted in their special population section. There are also portions where they have language that indicates some predetermination might take place or decisions that would be made outside of the IEP process. For example, there's a portion that indicates they would set a limit of pull-out time at 21% of a student's day, which is not a decision that can be made outside of the IEP process. It's dependent on a student's individual needs. Most of the language around pull-out services that would be available to students is geared toward math and ELA classes. However, with the applicant's goal to enroll students with disabilities at a percentage of around 15% of their total student population, it's likely that they may have students that require pull-out services for other things like behavior supports, and we need to ensure that there's a plan for that. Finally, the applicant highlights a co-teaching structure to serve English language learners that based on the staffing ratios they provided in their application, we are not confident they could actually make feasible. Close on the academic section by talking a little bit about some of the data that the applicant presented overall that speaks to the capacity that they have to do a couple of crucial things that we look at whenever we're looking at a charter application: improving student achievement and closing achievement gaps. The applicant provided some data to us in attachment H of their application, which I'll get to momentarily. They also highlighted a few other types of classical models that appear to be successful. Many of the models that they highlight as additional examples are not affiliated with the Barney Charter School initiative, that is the network of schools this charter would be a part of. And similarly, the data that the applicant provided as a whole, upon consideration from the review committee, we felt that it was not sufficient evidence to indicate that their model, if implemented fully, would improve student achievement or close achievement gaps at the levels that we want to see. I have here an example of the data that were provided to us in the application. The applicant shared some aggregate proficiency data, some aggregate achievement data from a few of their schools in Florida, and provided comparisons across the district in which they were serving, the school itself, as well as the state as a whole. However, there are several things missing from these data that don't allow us to say that it provides sufficient evidence that their model would be effective at improving student achievement and closing achievement gaps. Specifically, we don't have subgroup performance in these data. All of these data points were provided for schools at aggregate levels in their grade level cohorts, and we don't have information about how students with disabilities performed on these assessments, students of color, potentially students at risk. And those are all really good pieces of information to know if we are closing those achievement gaps for historically underserved students. Similarly, we don't have growth data provided to us. These are data on proficiency and achievement, which are very important, but a student can be considered proficient and lose ground in an academic year. And that's why in Tennessee, we focus on both proficiency and growth as measures of how a student is performing. And we do not have growth data to determine if even those students are making good scores at a proficiency level, if they're actually growing within that academic year. We also don't have demographic information for these schools compared to the district as a whole in which they're operating or the state as a whole. So we don't know how similar these populations actually look to one another to compare their performance. And then finally, when we look at information about the way that Florida measures proficiency versus the way Tennessee measures proficiency, they look a little bit different. Florida measures proficiency on a 5-point scale. Tennessee uses a 4-point scale. As a student in Tennessee, when you take your TCAP assessment, if you score below or approaching, you are not considered proficient. You're only considered proficient if you score on track or master. In Florida, you can be considered proficient for scoring at a level 3, 4, or 5. And at level 3, a student may need additional support in the next grade. So when we talk about what proficiency looks like in Tennessee compared with the data that we were provided here, some of these students that are included in this data as proficient may have needed individual support in the next grade level. And in Tennessee, that's not what we would consider. I'm going to talk next about the operations section, which includes information about areas like human capital, food service, facilities plans, and things of that nature. And it's the position of the review committee that the applicant does not meet the standard for their operations plans and criteria. There are some strengths. They do have a much more local board. Overall, there are several representatives on their board that are local to communities that the schools hope to serve. They also have the insurance assurances that they need that are required both by the application standard and by Tennessee state law. There are plans to use the Tennessee evaluation system for teachers and administrators. And they also retain several of their key central staff within the organization, American Classical Education, the central group that would be operating these schools. They retained their key central staff from last year. However, we do have some deficiencies that we want to highlight for you. First are some concerns with the governance structure proposed by this organization. There is no representation in the form of a Montgomery County resident on the board. We're one of the only counties that the applicant hopes to serve that does not have representation in the form of a Montgomery County resident on their board. We're currently represented with a representative from someone who is employed in Montgomery County, but he's not actually a resident of our community. We also have concerns with the statewide nature of this board and some of the plans that they have outlined in their application for how they would meet, and whether there would be sufficient enough transparency and involvement at the local level that would work for our community. Their bylaws only guarantee an annual meeting with other regular meetings at intermittent points as determined by the board, but we don't know what intermittent means and how often that would actually occur. There's also no guarantee that meetings would be held locally, as they only indicate meetings will be held at a school operated by the board, which could be one of 4 other places across the state of Tennessee. Another concern that we have with the governance structure of this board at this time is a lack of K-12 experience on this board. The only member cited as having a K-12 experience is a college professor of economics, not a K-12 expert or an education professor, which we feel is not sufficient experience in the K-12 arena to effectively manage a school. We also have several concerns with facilities at this point in the application process. First and foremost, the applicant only highlighted land that they are looking at right now on which they intend to build a school. And there were no other contingency locations provided for consideration of the review committee in the event that they can't secure land quickly enough and their construction timeline gets delayed. Similarly, we are also unsure of any facilities locally that are approved for educational occupancy at this time, and we want to ensure that any contingency locations they are investigating, we can investigate as a review committee and we can review fully. They have only allotted a few months for construction of their facility, unless we're just misunderstanding their timeline. They've only allotted less than 6 months to actually construct their school. And that may be a misunderstanding of their startup timeline in the application, but that is certainly a concern for the review committee. They provided an architectural rendering in their application that showed what the school would look like when constructed. And upon reviewing that rendering in the application, the review committee feels, based on our estimates and our expertise with constructing schools, that they have underestimated the cost of constructing that facility, and it will be much more expensive than what they've outlined in their budget materials. We also, the review committee was also concerned because there was some confusion as to where the rendering came from and what the nature of any partnership might be that the applicant would have with an architecture firm or some other kind of contractor. There was no logo or other identifying information on the rendering, so we didn't know how we could confirm the validity of that rendering and whether it would come in at cost that the applicant highlighted. The greatest concern, though, with the facilities plans as laid out by the applicant at this point really has to do with the plans that they've highlighted for their facilities, their enrollment projections, and their transportation plans, all sort of taken together. And it's because they've highlighted 4 possible locations for this school, all of which are located within the same census tract in the Montgomery County area, which you see here. Nothing wrong with locating a school in this census tract, obviously, nothing wrong with those facilities or anything like that, nothing wrong with that area. However, when you look at the enrollment projections and the enrollment targets that the applicant sets forth in their application, that's where it becomes a little bit more problematic. They project their enrollment at similar demographics to the district. They project that they'll enroll 40% students of color, about 50% students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and about 15% students with disabilities. The applicant also states on page 119 of their application that their plan on bringing the classical model to Montgomery County is to strive to make its classical education model available to all families from every race, class, and location, with a focus on those families who live nearest the school. When we look at the demographics of this census tract, it's clear that the applicant would struggle to enroll students at the targets that they set, particularly students of color. They would also struggle to recruit students from low-income backgrounds easily from this area, because when we look at the median income of Clarksville, Montgomery County versus this tract income, this tract has an income at a median level that's about 181% higher than the county as a whole. So when we think about the target demographics that this school has highlighted that they hope to achieve, their recruitment goals, the current facilities plans that we have in the review committee, we do not feel they can enroll students at the targets that they set with those facilities plans, especially because they indicate they don't plan to provide transportation. They indicate they'll consider it, and they do have a slight contingency for that, but they don't indicate they plan to provide transportation, a service which about 70% of low-income families require, in a district where nearly 2/3 of our students currently rely on transportation to and from school. We also have concerns with some of the pieces highlighted in the human capital portions of their application materials, specifically when we think about the likelihood that the applicant could recruit the staff and the administration that they need to run the school successfully. They plan to have an at-will relationship with their employees, which we feel will not allow them to recruit teachers effectively in this recruitment environment. We also, we feel that their current salary structure is not clear enough for us to be able to evaluate whether it's competitive. In some portions of their application, they indicate that they'll budget at least $50,000 a year for salary, but then they also indicate in other portions of the application that they'll have a school-wide average salary of $50,000 per year, which would mean that some teachers in the building would be making less than $50,000 a year minimum. So we want to ensure we have an understanding of exactly what that salary structure would look like. We also feel that their plans for evaluating and holding school leaders accountable and ensuring that school leaders have the support they need to be effective are not clear enough in the application. Currently, they do indicate there will be a corrective action process for administrators if they're found not to be meeting expectations, but it's not entirely clear what that intervention plan would look like, how long that process might take, what supports would be provided to the administrator to ensure that he or she could be successful. And that's really important because the model this applicant has places a lot of responsibility on that administrator. And the central staff that would be operating the school at the state level is a staff of 2 people. So we need to ensure that we know what those supports would look like. Finally, as I indicated, the applicant does not plan to provide transportation. It's not a requirement that charter schools provide transportation. It's something that they can provide contingencies for, and our applicant did provide a slight contingency for transportation services. However, given some of their other operational plans and some of the flaws that we see with their enrollment projections, we think that transportation would be a necessity for them to enroll at the targets that they indicate they set. We also wanted to highlight that the applicant indicates they will have a safety plan forthcoming, that it's something they'll continue working on in the planning year. However, given some of what we have experienced in Tennessee in recent weeks and the priority that the legislature has placed on school safety and some of the expectations they're setting of schools this legislative session, we think having that detailed safety plan is more critical than ever. Finally, I want to talk about section 3 of the application, which is the charter school financing section. It's the position of the review committee that the applicant does not meet the standard for charter school financing. There are a couple of things we want to highlight. The applicant was able to communicate additional sources of revenue outside of what they projected for their state revenue through the form of a loan, which is helpful for the review committee to know there is that contingency financial plan in the event that their revenues come up short. The applicant also provided some MOUs for services they can obtain at quoted prices in their application, which the review committee appreciated. However, ultimately, The applicant does not provide estimates for some critical expenditures that will affect their liquidity. There are no estimates for substitute costs, custodial costs, or furniture costs in year zero. The review committee feels that they have overestimated their revenue, particularly from the state level. Specifically, their revenue assumes full enrollment at the demographic estimates that they've provided in their enrollment estimates. And as you have seen me highlight previously, we're skeptical that those enrollment estimates will pan out based on the plans that we have in the application available to us right now. Tennessee has moved to a student-based budgeting system with the TISA formula that passed last year. So any fluctuation in their enrollment projections will vastly affect their state level revenues. We are also concerned about their financial viability and their plans, given that they desire to waive the Tennessee Fiscal Accounting Standards Law in Section 2.11. This is not a waiver that many other charter applicants request in our review of other charter applications. And we want to have an understanding if they plan to finance themselves with a loan as a contingency, as they've indicated, if their plans are sound and viable, we want to have an understanding of why waiving that law would be a necessity. And that's something that's concerning to the review committee as it relates to finances. I want to close by highlighting a few pieces. In the application on page 140, the applicant indicates a few challenges that they feel are most necessary for them to meet in order to ensure the viable opening of their school. They highlight hiring the best school leader and teachers possible, securing an optimal facility with opportunity for growth, and achieving student recruitment and enrollment goals. And I want to spend some time just sharing with you some of the positions of the review committee and some of the concerns that we've highlighted, specifically as it relates to these three areas that the applicant highlights are some of their most important challenges. As it relates to hiring the best school leader and teachers possible, as I mentioned, we do have some concerns about their viability to recruit the teachers that they need, the administrator that they need, given their at-will employment perspective, given the current salary structure that is not clear enough for us to assess if it's competitive or not for teachers in this environment, and given that their plans for evaluating and holding school leaders and how they would be supported are also not entirely clear to the review committee. They also indicated that they're not planning to require licensure for the administrator of the school. They wouldn't be required to have the administrator licensure that Tennessee requires for others. So as far as hiring qualified best school leader possible, there are a lot of deficiencies in the application at this point standing in their way. Securing an optimal facility with opportunity for growth. As I indicated, some of the primary concerns at this point are that they only highlighted land and haven't provided us with contingency locations. We're also unsure of any facilities locally that are approved for educational occupancy that we could actually consider. And as I mentioned, they highlight 4 possible locations in the same census tract based on their enrollment projections. We do not feel that locating in that area will allow them to recruit at the projections that they've set. Which gets to achieving student recruitment and enrollment goals, which is the third challenge that they highlighted. Again, based on the information that we had provided to us in the application that the full review committee could consider, we do not feel the information they provided represented significant demand for that model in the community. And I'll just highlight some of these pieces again, that when we look at their projected enrollment, the demographics of this particular census tract, both as far as racial and ethnic demographics and as far as income, many of their targets would be very difficult for them to achieve with this location. And so with that, in summary, for section 1, the applicant partially meets the standard. For section 2 and 3, the applicant does not meet the standard in the eyes of the review committee. Thus, we are recommending that you deny this application at this time. As far as next steps, you will vote on this application next Tuesday, April 25th. If the vote is to approve, CMCSS will become the authorizer for any charter applications for any approved schools. If the vote is to deny, the applicant has the opportunity to submit an amended application within 30 days. And the review committee would then review and consider those materials in a 60-day window, which would happen roughly around June and July. And at that time, if I remember correctly, the questions can be directed to Mr. Melvin, and that is all for my presentations.
Our meeting is adjourned. I